On Christmas Eve, I accidentally overheard my daughter-in-law bragging about remodeling and renting out my vacation home without my permission. But when she mentioned her plan to move her family in for free, I didn't say a word. A few weeks later, she left me 99 voicemails screaming into the phone. "The police are here. I used to think Christmas was all about reflection, warmth, and basic respect. But this past Christmas Eve taught me that some people mistake politeness for weakness." My name is Martha. I'm 66 years old. I've been a widow for 5 years, and I'm completely financially independent. I own a cozy, beautifully maintained historic home in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts, as well as a small beach house on the coast of Maine. The beach house was bought years ago entirely with my own inheritance. It was my sanctuary, my personal property. My son Julian and his wife Vanessa had been living rent-free in the spacious upper apartment of my Berkshire home to save money. That was a favor from me, not an entitlement. The holiday cheer in my living room that night was skin deep. Vanessa was handing out gifts with a bossy, patronizing attitude, while Julian sat quietly on the edge of the couch, staring at his phone. I was in the hallway fetching fresh coffee from the kitchen when I heard Vanessa's voice. She was on the phone with her mother, and the door was cracked open. "We had that old wooden deck ripped out, Mom." Vanessa bragged, her voice dripping with pride. "It's all modern bluestone now. We already made the money back by listing it on a short-term rental site while Martha was just sitting around here. And the best part, we're moving in full-time in January. Julian will handle his mother. She doesn't even use the place anymore." My heart didn't skip a beat. It just turned to ice. The wooden deck of my beloved Maine house was gone. Strangers had been sleeping in my bed, and my daughter-in-law was already planning to displace me from my own property. Taking a deep breath, I set the coffee tray on the table and walked into the living room. Vanessa hung up and flashed me a fake smile. I didn't smile back. Instead, I looked her dead in the eye, sat down calmly in my armchair, and folded my hands in my lap. The game had officially begun. "The coffee smells great, Martha," Vanessa said, reaching for a mug. Julian looked up nervously from his screen. I waited until Vanessa took her first sip before I spoke in a calm, rock-steady voice. "I overbeard your phone call, Vanessa. You remodeled and rented out my beach house without my permission." The fake smile instantly froze on her face. Julian turned bright red and stared at the floor. Vanessa, however, recovered quickly. She put on a pitying expression, looking at me like she was explaining the world to a senile old woman. "Martha, don't be so old-fashioned," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "The house sits empty half the time. We upgraded it. That rustic style was honestly dreadful, and we just added serious value to your property. Plus, we rented it out through an app to cover the contractor costs. It's all in the family after all." Julian cleared his throat weakly. "Yeah, Mom. Vanessa's right. It looks way better now. We thought you'd be happy we took care of it." Neither of them possessed a single ounce of guilt. They viewed my hard-earned property as a community project they had the right to manage. "So you made money off my property and now you're planning to move in," I stated flatly. Vanessa nodded triumphantly. "It's just the most logical step for the future. You're alone in this big house, and we need a fresh start by the coast." She spoke as if the decision had already been finalized. I didn't argue. I didn't even stand up. I simply pulled out my planner, made a small note, and looked at them. The holiday celebration was over for me, but their rude awakening was just around the corner. I didn't spend the night after Christmas crying. I spent it thinking clearly. On the morning of December 26th, while Julian and Vanessa were still sound asleep upstairs, I was already at my desk. I didn't need a courtroom to handle this. I held the bank accounts, the deed, and the keys. First, I logged into my online banking. I had previously given Julian signing privileges on my emergency property maintenance account. With 3 clicks, I revoked his access. Every single penny belonged to me. Next, I looked into the main house. Vanessa had been running the bookings through a popular vacation rental platform. I searched for the listing online and found it immediately. My house was completely booked solid for the upcoming months, and Vanessa was routing the cash directly into her personal account. I didn't bother calling the platform's customer service to complain. Instead, I cut off access to the house in a much more practical way. I called the local locksmith in Maine, who happened to be an old friend of my late husband. "Hey, Arthur," I said calmly. "I need the locks changed on my beach house immediately. The old ones are acting up. Please swap out the entire deadbolt system today and express mail the new keys to my house." Arthur didn't ask questions. He just got it done. As I hung up the phone, I heard Julian and Vanessa walking around in the kitchen upstairs. They had absolutely no idea that their path to their supposed new home had just been physically blocked. And that was only my first move. On the afternoon of the day after Christmas, I asked Julian to step into my home office for a private chat while Vanessa was out grocery shopping. My son looked incredibly anxious, tapping his fingers frantically on the desk. "Julian," I began, without beating around the bush. "You've lived rent-free upstairs for 3 years. I've covered the utilities because I thought you were saving up to build a life. Seeing you let Vanessa alter and profit off my coastal property is incredibly disappointing." Julian swallowed hard. "Mom, Vanessa just handles the logistics of everything," he stammered. "She means well. The rental income is going right back into paying off the renovations." I looked at my son and realized just how spineless he had become under her thumb. "The money is going into Vanessa's personal account, Julian, and the renovation was never authorized. Starting next month, you will pay me market rate rent for the upper apartment. We are also splitting the utilities down the middle." Julian stared at me like I'd slapped him across the face. "Rent." "But Mom, we're family." "Vanessa is going to lose her mind." "That is her choice," I replied, evenly, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "Here is the lease agreement. If you both don't sign it, you'll need to find another place to live by the end of the winter." He took the paperwork with trembling hands. Right then, we heard the front door click shut. Vanessa was back. Julian shoved the lease into his jacket pocket, completely unable to face his wife with the truth. The fragile illusion of their control was already starting to shatter. January arrived with a bitter, freezing cold. Vanessa treated me with icy arrogance, acting completely detached. She was operating under the assumption that her grand plan to take over the main house in the spring would go off without a hitch. What she didn't know was that the courier had delivered my new keys weeks ago. The spare set she had secretly made was now completely useless. On top of that, I had called the utility companies and dialed back the electricity and water service at the beach house to a bare minimum since my records showed no authorized guests for January. Vanessa, however, had secretly booked illegal winter guests. On January 10th, I was sitting down for dinner when I heard furious footsteps pounding down the stairs. Vanessa burst into my kitchen, her face flushed with rage, with Julian trailing behind her like a scolded puppy. "What did you do, Martha?" she practically shrieked. "Our guests are standing outside in the freezing cold in Maine, and they can't get in. The key doesn't work, and the heat is completely off. The rental platform is threatening me with massive penalties and banning my account." I took a slow sip of my tea and looked up at her. "I had the locks changed because unauthorized people were entering my property," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And I adjusted the utility structures. It is my house, after all." Vanessa was practically foaming at the mouth. "We spent $150,000 modernizing that place. You can't do this. We have contracts with these guests." I set my teacup down. "You made those contracts, Vanessa. I didn't. You are liable for the cancellations, not me. Now please excuse yourself from my kitchen." She stared at me, completely stunned into silence, as she realized her threats held zero power over me. Over the next few days, Vanessa tried to use Julian as a shield. He came downstairs multiple times to beg me to back down. "Mom, please just give us the new keys. Vanessa has to reimburse the guests out of pocket, and it's costing us thousands of dollars. We're going broke here." I sat comfortably in my armchair, working on a knitting project. "Julian, you are an adult. If your wife decides to run an illegal business using someone else's property, she has to bear the financial risk. I won't profit off this mess, but I won't enable this entitlement either." "But what about the $150,000 for the remodel?" he cried out in desperation. "We poured our savings into that." I paused my knitting and looked up at him. "You destroyed my beautiful wooden deck to put down cold stone I never asked for. You damaged my home. You should be grateful I'm not demanding you pay to fix it. The keys stay with me." Julian finally saw that the lenient mother who used to let things slide was gone. He turned and walked out of the room without another word. That very evening, I noticed a notification on my tablet. Vanessa had attempted to log into my automated utility accounts for the Berkshire house to cancel the payments for the internet and trash pickup as a petty act of revenge. Fortunately, I had already updated all my accounts with randomized passwords and two-factor authentication. Every single attempt she made to strike back financially was blocked by my quiet preparation. She was losing her grip on everything while I simply went about my day. In the middle of January, an envelope arrived from Vanessa's mother. It was a handwritten, venomous letter calling me a heartless, selfish mother who was actively ruining her own children's happiness. I read it through, twice walked over to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. Emotional blackmail has no effect on me. I had drawn my boundaries in wet cement, and they were now set in stone. Meanwhile, Julian still hadn't handed back the signed lease for the upstairs apartment. They clearly thought I was bluffing about evicting them. I didn't hesitate. I called a local moving company and scheduled a crew to come at the end of the month to pack up and store the upstairs furniture if they didn't pay or leave. I then sent Julian an official notice via certified mail stating that I was reclaiming the upper unit for personal use as an art studio. When the mailman delivered the letter, a massive screaming match erupted upstairs. I could hear Vanessa's shrieks piercing right through the ceiling. She was a woman used to dictating everyone else's lives. Now, she was being dictated to by the unyielding realities of property law. The very next morning, Julian stood at my kitchen door, holding the signed lease and a stack of cash for the first month's rent. "Here," he muttered under his breath, "Vanessa doesn't know I'm paying you. Please don't kick us out." I took the money, counted it deliberately, and wrote him a receipt. "This covers you for this month, Julian. But Vanessa needs to understand she is a tenant here, nothing more. And you two are never setting foot in my beach house again." He nodded silently, completely crushed between his wife's entitlement and my boundaries. By the end of January, the tension reached a boiling point. Vanessa apparently decided that the only way to win was to seize control by force. She convinced herself that if she could just physically occupy the beach house, she could bully me into backing down. She took a long weekend off from work, packed Julian into the car, and drove all the way up to the Maine coast. She had even hired a local handyman, lying to him that she was the owner and needed the locks drilled out because she lost her keys. What she completely failed to account for, however, was the tight-knit coastal community. My next-door neighbor up there, Mr. Higgins, was a retired railroad worker who kept a very watchful eye on the block. I had explicitly warned him a few weeks prior that no one had my permission to be at the house. When he saw a strange contractor and Vanessa hovering over my front door with power tools, he didn't check his phone or wait around. He didn't know or care about our family drama. All he saw was a break-in happening in broad daylight. While Vanessa was busy ordering the handyman around, Mr. Higgins calmly dialed the local police department. Back in the Berkshires, I was sitting comfortably in my living room, reading a novel by the fire. My phone sat quietly on the end table next to me. Suddenly, the screen lit up with Vanessa's caller ID. It started vibrating violently. I didn't pick up. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Over the next 2 hours, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Vanessa was trying frantically to reach me while her entire plan imploded miles away. The phone simply would not stop ringing. When the storm finally quieted down and I looked at my notifications, the screen displayed a staggering number, 99 missed calls, accompanied by a long string of panicked voicemails from Vanessa. I tapped the first message. Her voice was shaking, with a mixture of blinding rage and sheer terror. "Martha, pick up the damn phone right now. The police are here. They're accusing us of breaking and entering and criminal mischief." The handyman walked off the job. "Tell these officers right now that this is our family house." I skipped to the next voicemail. Vanessa's demanding tone had completely disintegrated into hysterical sobbing. "Martha, please, Julian is sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They're threatening to take us down to the station because we don't have any proof of ownership, and we tried to force the door. Why are you doing this to us? Call them right now." I deleted the voicemails one by one. I didn't feel a malicious sense of joy, just a profound, deeply satisfying sense of peace. They had tried to steal my sanctuary, and the world had simply answered back. I didn't call the Maine Police Department, and I certainly didn't call Vanessa back. Instead, I dialed Mr. Higgins. "Hi, Mr. Higgins. It's Martha. Is everything quiet over there?" "Sure is, Martha," the old man replied in his slow, steady drawl. "The officers escorted those two off your property. They couldn't produce a deed and didn't have your written consent. Your house is locked tight and the door is perfectly fine." I thanked him warmly. My daughter-in-law had stepped right into a trap of her own making. 2 days later, Julian and Vanessa slunk back into town. They were pale, completely exhausted, and thoroughly humiliated. The local police had let them go with a severe warning and a record of the incident. After verifying their identities, mostly because I chose not to travel up there to press formal charges, the lesson itself was payment enough. Vanessa couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Her arrogance was shattered and her grip on my life was gone for good. Within a week, she packed her bags and moved back into her mother's house. Julian stayed upstairs, looking visibly lighter, without his wife's constant scheming. When March rolled around, I drove up to Maine myself. The new bluestone deck actually looked quite elegant, even if it wasn't what I would have chosen. But the best part was that the house smelled like the ocean again, free of the ghost of unwanted guests and greedy plots. The coastal real estate market was booming, and thanks to the expensive modernizations Vanessa had inadvertently funded, the property value had skyrocketed. Right then and there, I decided to sell it. I didn't need the baggage of the past anchoring me down. With the proceeds from the sale, I bought a gorgeous secluded condo nestled in the mountains of Colorado, keeping the address entirely to myself. The remaining funds were safely tucked away into an independent investment portfolio for my retirement. This past Christmas, I spent the evening on my new balcony looking out over the snow-covered peaks. I sipped a glass of wine, listened to the absolute silence of the mountains, and smiled. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's just giving people the receipts for their own actions. And that is exactly how I won my freedom.